Prince Harry booed. Yes, boo. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Something called nationalword.com and an article from Claire Schofield in Imogen House tells us Prince Harry booed by London crowds as he's relegated to third row for King Charles' coronation. Where did this booing take place? Well, let's find out. Prince Harry was greeted by boos by crowds in London as he made his way to Westminster Abbey for King Charles's coronation. Boos rang out around Hyde Park as the Duke of Sussex appeared on the big screen early on Saturday morning. National World reporter Imogen House was at the scene as the crowd jeered, although the unfriendly welcome was met with some pushback from members of the public, with one woman responding, "That's not very nice." Very, very British, that, isn't it? All these people around you see the Prince of Pink Pancakes appearing on the big screen, and they don't like the traitorous runt. And therefore, as they're perfectly entitled to do, they make their views known. "Boo! Boo!" cry the crowd. "I say, that's not very nice," remarks a woman. And then afterwards, I believe they all sat down for tea and scones to discuss it in a perfectly civilised manner. So Harry was booed, although he will not have heard the booing. But that does demonstrate the level of unpopularity that he now has. And where has that come from? Well, his own behaviour, and he's a grown man, but who has caused him to behave in that way? His wife, the narcissist. Hitherto, Harry was well liked by most people. He was given sympathy because of the circumstances of losing his mother in tragic and unexpected circumstances when he was a young boy. People found him warm, engaging, fun, and they genuinely liked him. He basked in the love of many individuals. And he's thrown all of that away simply because he was given the illusion that a narcissist weaves that he was cared for, loved, supported, and of course we must not forget those lashings of spicy poontang. Remember, even when his friends were complaining about the way that she was alienating him and causing him to change his ways by doing morning yoga and not eating bacon and eggs, he just said, "But she's so hot," which just shows that he was thinking with little Harry. His own emotional thinking caused him to ignore the fact that his friends were telling him, "You're changing, Harry, and not necessarily in a good way." His emotional thinking caused him to fail to recognise that he was being distanced from his friends and then his family. And this is indeed common when a narcissist gets hold of somebody. He, of course, deemed such separation acceptable. What was the price? Somebody telling him that she understood him, someone saying that they were soulmates, someone who wanted to spend all her time with him, someone that was giving him lashings of spicy poontang. And therefore, it is unsurprising that he would quite readily fail to see the red flags, and also, where he did see some problematic behaviours, he simply ignored them because he thought the trade-off was more than acceptable. This is entirely common when it comes to the victim of a narcissist. But Harry then finds himself immensely unpopular to the extent that he's booed, even though he doesn't hear this. But the criticism of Harry has continued because it has been demonstrated by, for instance, in The Times, where Hilary Rose states, "Harry came, talked to no one, and left. Was it worth it?" He's not only become unpopular with the British people, but also the press are continuing to give him a hard time. Why? Well, it's a combination of they don't like his behaviours, but also he's now deemed to be fair game as a consequence of the complaints that he's made about the media, his actions in suing the media, and as a consequence of that, I dare say that numerous editors, if not proprietors, have basically said, "Gun down the ginger fucker." Interestingly, in this article, which I'm going to take excerpts from, many people in the comments are basically saying, look, he arrived, he kept a low profile, and then he left. You know, give the guy a break. So he still engenders a degree of sympathy, particularly when he's away from his wife. And many of those commenting below the line felt that he's being unnecessarily targeted by the media, although they understand why this is happening. Hilary Rose writes, on the plus side, Prince Harry could reflect. Nobody thumped him. Nobody mentioned the dog bowl. Nobody argued about uniforms. And if Netflix were there, well, at least they got wet. In a parallel universe, the king's son would have been at the coronation with his wife, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brother. Instead, Harry ambled into Westminster Abbey with a property developer and a former tequila salesman, Edo Mapelli Mozzi and Jack Brooksbank. Their wives, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, are the only members of the family who'll still talk to him, thus demonstrating the loss that he's experienced with so many other members of the family. He walked up the nave on his own, nodding hopefully at people in the congregation who didn't nod back, and took a seat in Siberia. Well, not quite Siberia. He wasn't on the other side of the nave from his family as he was at the Platinum Jubilee, but he was seated with the also-rans in the third row, behind the Princess Royal next to Brooksbank, along from Prince Andrew, and up the nave from end and deck. He chatted a bit to Brooksbank and even cracked a smile at one point. But the depth of the family froideur was obvious. Nobody in front turned to say hello or tapped him on the shoulder from behind. Scarcely anyone even looked at him, although Princess Anne seems to have made a point of smiling at him. Was it an accident that there were more shots of Tom Parker Bowles, the king's stepson, than there were of Harry? Was it a coincidence that in so many of the shots Harry was cropped just out of sight? The palace controls the footage with an iron fist, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt right until the end. But then, as the king and queen processed out of Westminster Abbey, the chosen shot had Harry right in the middle, his face hidden by the big red feather on Anne's hat. See the plume of doom. At that point I decided the palace was having a laugh. He arrived on Friday morning from California and flew commercial, which was good of him. He spent the night at Frogmore Cottage, his last before his father repossesses it. Did he feel a pang when he saw the other members of the family in their gowns and uniforms? He was dressed like any other civilian in a morning suit and medals, and seems essentially to have flown 5,000 miles to look at his lap. When the sceptre was put into his father's hand, he looked at his order of service. When the crown was put on his father's head, he was looking the other way. When the choir launched into Zadok the priest, fit to raise the dead, he was gazing idly up the nave towards the door. He peered around the side of Tim Lawrence to see his father standing at the altar, and glanced at William as he walked back to his seat. But then it was straight back to his lap. He didn't look up when the Archbishop of Canterbury shouted, "God save the King," and he definitely didn't look up when his supposedly wicked stepmother, in a Garrard diamond necklace and with 2 small Jack Russells embroidered in gold thread on the hem of her gown, was crowned. He muttered, "God save the King," and the national anthem. He looked at his feet. If Charles glanced at Harry, I didn't see it. William and Kate definitely didn't, because if they had, he would have turned to stone. As is customary with the couple who left London for a quiet life, the run-up to the coronation came with a lot of noise. Would they be invited? Would they come? Harry, reliably vocal in his hatred of the press and publicity, began negotiations through the press in a blaze of publicity. Going on television in January to flog his autobiography, which threw his family under the bus and reversed over them several times, he was asked if he'd be joining them at the coronation. He replied with consummate passive aggression that the ball was in their court. He wanted an apology, a sit-down peace summit, an explicit acknowledgement of the Sussex's terrible suffering, which no amount of money, marital happiness and Californian sunshine has done anything to abate. The royals effectively replied that they'd love to talk, but they'd be very busy washing their hair for the next 5 months. There were rumours that the King and Prince William disagreed over whether to invite them at all. The King thought yes, whereas William worried they would pull a stunt. A freelance royal walkabout in a deprived London borough, perhaps, posing as the Duke and Duchess of the downtrodden and dispossessed. A source told Valentine Lowe, the Times' royal correspondent, that the invitation would not be wrapped in an apologetic bow. It would be, "Here is an invitation, let us know if you are coming." Email negotiations went on long after the deadline for RSVPs had expired, with reports that Harry was being advised to play it long right up to the last minute. One frustrated source described it to the Mail on Sunday as like trying to communicate with Mars. It was easier to deal with Sinn Féin. To chivvy them along, Harry told the Daily Telegraph that he had more than enough material for another 400-page book, and went on TV to say, with a straight face, there needs to be a constructive conversation, one that can happen in private, that doesn't get leaked. He also said that writing 400 pages of nasty things about his family felt like an act of service, although he didn't clarify to whom. In the end, the King is said to have been pleased that Harry was there, while the Queen was in a forgiving mood. One courtier said carefully of Harry's wife's absence, "The outcome chosen is one that suits all." Another was more direct. There were audible sighs of relief, although if they'd only listened to Harry's wife's podcast last year, they would know that actually she is not difficult, and her presence is in fact a balm to the soul. She was apparently worried that she might be booed, or as they put it in California, she had a desire to avoid attracting negative attention. For the Monty Shit Show too, it's back to playing the long game. Peace talks could happen in the future, the Sunday Times reported. Harry will be back. This time he came on his own, sat on his own, talked to pretty much no one, and left. By the time the Golden Coach was back at Buckingham Palace, he was at Heathrow. He had been in England for 29 hours. Was it worth it? I guess it depends how much you're paying. An article which portrays Harry in a poor light and showing really was it worth him coming after all. And this continued criticism will go on because, as I mentioned earlier, the press have deemed that it's open season on the two of them. And I can anticipate that there will be further revelations about them, even though they may not come anywhere near the United Kingdom for the foreseeable future. Harry was being booed. Harry has received a pasting in the press. His unpopularity is solely as a consequence of his behaviour, which has been occasioned by his wife. Whether he will realise that, time will tell, but he will at least recognise that he is unpopular, frozen out, and he knows that his behaviour is behind that. And it might just start causing him to think about it. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.